The following review contains spoilers for the film Aquaman. Proceed with caution. I want to take a moment to talk about movie trilogies. Admittedly, this is going to get a little tricky, as many of the trilogies I'm about to discuss here have, by this point, grown beyond their initial 3 chapters, some of them exponentially so. Others have found their previously flawless conclusions marred by the unwelcome additions of weak 4th installments, and one franchise in particular has now managed to overstay its welcome by 2 whole entries. But I would eagerly forgive this one if they'd invite John McTiernan back for one final outing with the only title I'd be happy with. But I digress. My first trilogy experience, like many of you, was Star Wars. A New Hope hit the ground running with its introduction to an expansive universe filled with epic space battles, creative creature effects, instantly memorable heroes, and larger-than-life villains. And while the events of the first chapter opened the eyes of a fledgling farm boy and set him on the path to greatness, it was its superior sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, that tested not only his bravery, but the resolve of all those we'd come to know and love. Scattered across the cosmos by a ruthless adversary with renewed purpose, this leg of the journey built upon the foundation laid by the last, bringing with it new champions, greater dangers, and a cliffhanger of a resolution that, in a pre-internet era, left audiences adrift in a 3-year sea of uncertainty as bleak and dark as the cold infinity of space itself. Return of the Jedi, the third and final, at least then, chapter, opened with a daring rescue and the showdown with the despotic gangster the series had been building to since its beginning, and in Luke Skywalker boasted a fully realized hero at the peak of his powers, embarking on his greatest challenge yet. It was a grand finale, and quite satisfying despite its flaws. That said, I won't be discussing the prequels here, or probably anywhere for that matter.
Too soon?
When everything was said and done, whether intentionally or not, Star Wars OG not only became the definitive trilogy of that generation, it became what we expected from a trilogy. It became the way to do one. Many more followed, with some striking closer to the mark than others, even as they experimented with the templates set years before in that galaxy far, far away. The Alien franchise very nearly achieved trilogy perfection with its frighteningly inventive 1979 intro and an action-packed 1986 follow-up that was able to seamlessly pick up where the first left off, despite the 2 films taking place 57 years apart. And while 1992's third installment was by no means a poor film, it was a very different one, and the aggressive departure from the style, setting, tone, and stakes established by the previous 2 entries left audiences with an undeniable sense of ennui.
Fuck!
A similar fate befell Back to the Future, which originated with a near-flawless debut film that still stands the test of time, pun utterly intended, has a now dated but imaginative and narratively ambitious sequel that at times swims in surprisingly uncomfortable waters, but culminates in a bizarre final chapter that manages to recycle the first premise while somehow feeling nothing like it, sadly to its detriment. The Jason Bourne saga is close to perfect provided you stop at the third one. It holds a place of renown in my heart, what with its stellar action sequences, visceral grounded fight choreography, and a soundtrack that never gets old. But it's the little narrative flourishes along the way I adore most, like how Identity focuses on Bourne's last assignment, while Supremacy concerns itself primarily with the damage caused by his first. How Ultimatum begins before Supremacy ends, the satisfying way the final shot of Ultimatum mirrors the opening scene from Identity, and how the repeat of this single line of dialogue from Ultimatum,
Look at us. Look at what they make you give.
adds an additional layer of depth to Clive Owen's doomed professor from Identity, giving us a brief glimpse at his own path, which up until this point wasn't even something we thought to consider. Human beings, both as storytellers and as listeners, crave payoffs and a kind of symmetry in the tales we're told in order to be fully satisfied with them. And even if that isn't true of all of you out there,
I need it!
if there is a reigning champion in the game right now, it remains Peter Jackson's senses-shattering Lord of the Rings trilogy. With its unrivaled casting, its rich, sprawling lived-in worlds, its extensive but thankfully streamlined lore and history, the heart it never loses along the journey even as its stakes swell to cataclysmic proportions, its epic in every sense of the term's scale, scope, and vision, and a score that became legend before the halfway mark of the first film, LOTR set a new standard for how franchises can be executed, and that so many have fallen so short in their attempts to replicate its success is testament to just how difficult it was. There really are far too many to cover here, especially in the realm of superheroes and comic adaptations, which have become as ubiquitous as the westerns of yesteryear. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, or at least 2/3 of it, and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, with both franchises showcasing middle chapters of such unrivaled excellence no serious conversation on the subject can be had without mentioning their names, prove there is no shortage of evidence for how to do this kind of thing well. But what does all this talk about trilogies have to do with Aquaman?
Absolutely nothing!
Well, no, it's quite a bit, as it turns out, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Before we dive into Aquaman the movie, we have to first come to terms with Aquaman the character, and the best way to do that is by understanding the state of the cinematic landscape he would very soon be joining. 2017 gave us Justice League, Warner Bros. And DC Comics' questionable attempt to reverse engineer what Marvel had accomplished so effortlessly 5 years earlier, which sought to introduce not only Aquaman, but Cyborg, The Flash, and Jack Kirby's Fourth World in the mad flailing hope they'd be able to spin solo films from the team-up instead of the opposite approach that sent the Avengers laughing all the way to the bank. But I'm sorry to say,
this damn thing doesn't work at all!
Justice League was a schizophrenic Frankenstein's monster of tones and styles that was as disappointing visually as it was narratively.
Yeah. Something is definitely bleeding.
And the aimless, hard-drinking surfer bro Aquaman presented to us by the film, in spite of being portrayed by the charismatic walking mountain that is Game of Thrones' Jason Momoa, was far from a lock, and anything but a sure bet. Up until this point, Wonder Woman had proven to be the DCEU's one inarguable success, and as vivid as her backstory gets, she was still easily the less difficult character to adapt for the screen, having already been well represented both in live-action form and in animation on television for decades. The same simply couldn't be said of the other. Aquaman has never been cool, and people have been mocking him for it for nearly as long as he's been around.
My ability to talk with fish is of no help, Wonder Woman.
In a team that features the world's greatest detective, the fastest man alive, an immortal Amazonian goddess, and what effectively amounts to an alien deity who might also be the fastest man alive.
Can Superman outrun the Flash?
Sure, why not?
How much is a guy whose chief contribution is that he swims really well going to bring to the table? Comic and cartoon writers have been trying to get us to take Aquaman seriously for years, at one point even going so far as to completely overhaul him with a bad attitude, a luxurious Maine Lethal Weapon era Mel Gibson would have been envious of, a manly man beard, and a literal hook hand for the dark and edgy era that all but took hold in comics during the mid-90s. A look that not only made its way into the well-received Justice League animated series, but was clearly the intent here as well, sans hook hand of course. And I can't fault them. The clean-cut Hitler Youth Aryan ideal Aquaman always seemed ridiculous, out of place, but the choice to cast honest-to-God native Hawaiian Jason Momoa seemed right, and covered a lot of ground in getting me to at least a proper visual headspace to receive the film. In a time when traditionally white characters find themselves race and even gender swapped for the sake of inclusion, which is in all fairness reason enough, this particular instance felt especially inspired.
My man.
Having said that, I'm not here to dump on the film. There is quite a bit about it that could have been improved if only the time and care had been taken, but it is far from a failure. In fact, I found it thoroughly enjoyable. Aquaman is effective in its way, very entertaining, and an absolute feast for the eyes and ears, what with Academy Award-nominated cinematographer Don Burgess's vibrant, breathtaking visuals and a unique, inventive, borderline ludicrous soundscape that plays like a cartoon from the 80s sprung to life. I mean, just listen to how insane the sound design in this gets. It's often quite bizarre, and I'm not entirely certain that's intentional, and while it pales in comparison to Wonder Woman and the recently released Shazam, which is awesome by the way, it is superior to Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League in nearly every conceivable regard. I know.
That's crazy, right?
Aquaman comes to us from horror master in the making James Wan, director of the legitimately unsettling Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga-led Conjuring, and its equally creepy Britain-based follow-up. That one Fast and Furious movie where Paul Walker fights Tony Jaa, and the only good Saw movie.
I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So let's get into this proper then.
Okay, let's run.
Aquaman, the character, not the movie's first scene involves the daring rescue of a hijacked Russian nuclear submarine from a team of high-tech pirates, and this moment, when he forces the Akula-class attack sub to surface, gives us, in case you'd forgotten what Justice League proved he was capable of, an idea of the staggering strength he possesses. For the time being, we'll ignore the fact that submarines don't work that way, and everybody on board probably has a nasty case of decompression sickness right about now, because that's neither here nor there. That said, I don't care who you are or where you're from, this bit
Permission to come aboard.
is precisely the kind of comic book hero banter I live for, so I am completely here for it. I kinda love this scene in which Aquaman tears through these pirates with reckless abandon. It's rowdy, over the top, and trots out a couple of slick camera maneuvers along the way. It honestly reminded me of that firefight from Predator, the one where Arnold Schwarzenegger's Dutch and his Special Forces commandos obliterate a rebel camp, wiping out a small army barely without breaking a sweat. It's designed to showcase how efficient and formidable they are, so when the Predator comes along later and starts wasting them all one after the other, it becomes an illustration of how dangerous it is by comparison. Here we see Aquaman is unnaturally powerful. Punches mean nothing, knives mean less, he's bulletproof, bends steel with his bare hands, and is even able to shrug off point-blank rocket blasts with no damage taken. Well, maybe a little damage.
Ow.
This exists to show how much of a threat the Atlanteans are when they arrive and start kicking the crap out of him later. The trailers heavily suggested Aquaman might have less in common with its bleaker DCEU big brothers, a welcome change that also kind of became part of the problem, as that pendulum seemed at times to swing too far in the other direction, often leaving me to ponder just how seriously I was meant to take the events unfolding on screen. I mean, the movie's title is spelled in fish. At one point there's an octopus playing the drums, there's that purely awful Pitbull song inexplicably jammed into the middle of the movie.
From ocean to ocean, sea to sea, I'm something that you gotta see.
Stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here.
And that's not even the end of it. During the titular character's first appearance, somewhere in the midst of that righteous fight scene, we are treated to this moment. Which, inadvertently or not, begs the question, is this a comedy? Because while I don't think I was supposed to laugh just then, I definitely did. And believe me when I tell you nothing that followed would fully put that nagging uncertainty to rest. When Aquaman encounters and subsequently makes short work of his would-be nemesis, the as-yet unnamed Black Manta, played adequately, which is not a compliment, by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, Manta's pirate father Kane is trapped, injured, and the two are left behind to die despite a heartfelt plea for help that goes unheeded by our hero. Before setting off an explosive charge that kills him, Kane offers up this line to his son.
Hey! You need to live so you can kill that son of a bitch!
Now, the need of a son to avenge his father is nothing new. It isn't even something bad, so I have no gripe with its usage. It has been the motivation of many characters that have come before, and will likely continue serving as one for many yet to be.
Hello! My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die!
However, Aquaman largely wastes Black Manta, relegating him to grunt work and a one-dimensional backstory, but I'll discuss that in greater detail momentarily. First, let me back up and provide you with some much-needed context for what we're seeing. The film opens on a lighthouse in a storm and its keeper Thomas Curry, who discovers Nicole Kidman's wounded Atlanta washed up upon the rocks. The scene plays fast, with Aquaman's own narration chronicling the tale of how his parents met and fell in love. Now, normally I'd be bothered by the idea that Atlanta, fugitive queen of a vast, advanced underwater civilization, falls head over fins for literally the first human man she meets. But the story sells it to us as fate, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so... whatever. But even using destiny as an out here, this trope always makes me tired. It isn't long before Atlanta is pregnant, and in even less time she is the proud mother of a bouncing baby boy, one whom she makes no qualms about assigning the none too small task of uniting the undersea and surface worlds before he can even crawl.
He's living proof our people can coexist. He could unite our worlds one day.
This is important as I believe it represents a missed opportunity where Aquaman and Black Manta's characters are concerned, and I'll come back to why a little later. What follows is an info dump about the fate of Atlantis and how only its true king can wield an impossibly powerful magic trident which has been lost for ages. It's disguised as a bedtime story, and Kidman sells it with aplomb because she's Nicole Kidman, but it's an info dump all the same. One of several info dumps, as a matter of fact, the movie feels forced to resort to because the worlds that inhabit it are too rich, their histories too deep, which is the central thesis of this essay, that being that there is simply too much information that needs to be parsed for a 2-hour and 20-minute feature. Regardless of that fact, the filmmakers seem determined to accomplish two feats here, both seemingly at odds with one another. One, to explore none of these concepts beyond their surface Wikipedia-like summarizations, and two, to simultaneously leave nothing behind for future installments in the franchise to expound upon.
Why would you do such a foolish thing?
What's more, the film knows this, because every time we are subjected to any of these info dumps, the only way the movie seems to know how to navigate out of one is by having something blow up. This happens 4 times throughout the feature. Here, and here. Recurring until it becomes comical. Following the attack by Atlantean forces on the lighthouse, which if nothing else successfully whets our appetite for the imaginative level of costume design and style of action we're in store for, Atlanta resigns herself to her fate and returns to the sea, leaving Thomas and their newborn son Arthur behind with the promise they'll one day be reunited.
Oh, mama?
But this doesn't happen, and Arthur grows to resent Atlantis for taking his mother away from them. And who can blame him? But let's get back to the current timeline. While Arthur has grown into a local celebrity, a friend of fishermen and well-meaning mariners alike, underwater trouble is brewing, and his name is Orm Marius.
Call me Ocean Master.
It's a nice name.
A lot goes down in this scene, this meeting between shark-riding Atlanteans and giant armored seahorses that make, I shit you not, honest-to-God horse noises, so do whatever you want with that information. Once again, it's little more than an info dump, and the way you know that it's an info dump is it gets bombed to hell when the characters have run out of things to say. We're introduced to Orm, played by a Patrick Wilson who has apparently sworn an oath to chew every scene he's in down to its atoms, and it's kinda glorious how hard he goes in this, how willing and eager he is to commit to the near constant absurdity on display all around him. We learn he is Aquaman's half-brother, the son of the man their mother fled Atlantis to be free of years ago. He longs to unite the 4 remaining ocean kingdoms under his banner and make war with the surface world because diplomacy is hard, and for some reason the media is still having trouble believing Atlantis actually exists, despite the fact that Earth was invaded by giant crickets 6 whole months ago. Which is a pretty weird place to draw a line where what you are and aren't willing to accept is concerned.
We already have an Atlantean living among us, and his name is Aquaman.
Here we're introduced to Dolph Lundgren's King Nereus, ruler of Zebel, a neighboring undersea nation. He is the hot-headed Orm's opposite, seasoned, experienced,
And a full-blood scholar.
and doesn't wish to go to war with the surface world just yet, even as they threaten to devastate all the underwater kingdoms with their continual pollution, placing Orm firmly in that clearly villainous, but I get it category of bad guys. Willem Dafoe is also present in this scene as Vulko, whom we later learn served as Arthur's Obi-Wan Kenobi in his youth, opening the boy's eyes to the world beneath the waves while also honing his considerable abilities. I'm covering this scene because my complaint with the way information gets delivered in this film isn't so much about what is being said, but whom it's being said to. The conversation that takes place during this scene is unnatural. It exists solely for the viewer. It's knowledge every character involved possesses, yet it's stated anyway, and presented to us in a fashion that feels forced and inorganic.
This is all wrong.
And it really didn't have to be this way. Arthur serves as the audience surrogate, our POV and entry point into this universe. Under Vulko, he was a child who never knew he was Atlantean, learning about his people's history, his abilities, and his world all at once. His questions are our questions, and you can almost always take the edge off an info dump if the information given is for the benefit of the characters and the audience alike, as is evidenced in part by the scene in which Mara, played utterly without agency by Amber Heard, travels to Atlantis, offering both Arthur and the viewers a guided tour of the breathtaking sunken city that grants us at least some time to appreciate it. Yet any other time the movie needs us to know something, it only ever just tells it to us instead of letting us discover it as it does here, which strips the world of a sense of wonder. The same thing occurs when they arrive at their destination, an abandoned derelict in the old city, the ruins of the Atlantis that was before hubris sank into the bottom of the sea. In this scene, Vulko delivers stirring oration chronicling the fall of Atlantis and neatly sets up the remainder of the film's objectives. Arthur must find the legendary lost trident of Atlan, which only the one true king may wield in order to halt Orm's war. It's a cool story and a welcome chance to see Atlantis in its golden age, but the problem again is this is information every character in the scene already has.
Oh, I know the story.
This is the kind of thing that belongs in a prologue, which I admit couldn't have been done, as it would have given the film 2, so I do not envy the filmmakers this particular challenge.
How considerate.
With that in mind, Tangent 1985 doesn't usually Monday morning quarterback the movies we discuss because we understand filmmaking is incredibly difficult. It involves thousands of moving parts, and the sheer amount of things that have to happen in order for any of it to work at all is staggering. I've never known a single production, and neither have you, where everything went exactly as planned.
I think a plan is just a list of things that don't happen.
There are any number of reasons why a movie could go off the rails. It could be anything on the spectrum from budgetary constraints and studio interference to clashes of ego and poor test audience reception. So we don't spend a lot of time trying to make a case for what writers and directors should have done in any given scenario, especially from the largely unscrutinized comfort of an armchair after the fact. It's always easier to see where a mistake was once you've made it, so this review constitutes something of an anomaly for us and is by no means indicative of a change in form going forward.
I'm glad you got that out of your system.
That said, we need to get back to Mara for a second. I said Mara had no agency before, which is true. She also has no character arc. She is the daughter of Nereus, and Orm's betrothed, which would be worth something if she actually loved him and was maybe forced to reconcile her feelings for him with his warmongering, but nothing of the sort happens. She dislikes him from the off, robbing both her character and the film of a level of drama that could have been interesting to explore. Her motivation is presented as a desire to stop Orm's war, but it's a thinly veiled conceit and secondary to her true goal, helping Arthur defeat Orm by any means. Atlantis is enslaved by its ideals, an ineffectual patriarchy crippled into torpor and stasis by its reliance on royal lineage and birthrights as the only means by which conflicts may be settled. And while that certainly lends itself to epic confrontations between the ill-fated and the predestined alike, it relegates everyone else to the role of helper, or worse, spectator. That literally nobody but Arthur can solve the problems in this story is a little aggravating.
I am the chosen one.
Yeah, I know. The movie is called Aquaman, and it's absolutely his show, but there are just so many characters in this not doing anything but hanging around waiting for him to save them that it makes you wonder if they even deserve to be saved. I wager I'd have found Mara a more compelling character, especially with her litany of skills and powers, if she'd taken on the challenge of stopping Orm herself against the wishes of her father and the others, and run afoul of Arthur along the way, in effect making it a race for the throne. Personally, I believe her to be far more qualified to rule than Arthur, but beyond him, nothing anyone else in this movie really wants seems to matter. There is so much material crammed into this, so many ways Aquaman could have been a few great films instead of merely one pretty good one, which brings us to the point. All of this should have been 3 movies, and here's how we would have done it.
Listen to what I'm going to tell you now.
Now, when I say that, I'm not referring to whatever ends up being the storyline for the Aquaman sequels DC hopes to execute over the next few years. I'm referring to the events that take place in this film. And I know what you're thinking. How do I know the sequels yet to be won't use the setups and unresolved plot lines from this Aquaman? Well, it's because they can't. This film leaves it all on the field to be certain, but in oddly relevant terms only Gattaca can best describe.
I never saved anything for the swim back.
It adopts a go big or go home philosophy, but in doing so burns its future story threads to a cinder. If this were a television show, I would liken Aquaman to a season finale where there's little hope of the series getting renewed. It spins every idea it has all at once, just in case a sequel never gets greenlit, yet still hopes to be able to revisit those ideas should the opportunity to continue the franchise be afforded. But my concern is that by the time you reach the end of this movie, you're left with a kind of scorched earth storytelling-wise, an infertile narrative terrain where I fear the filmmakers may learn nothing planted in this chapter can grow, at least nothing healthy.
That doesn't sound good.
At its conclusion, there are simply no more worlds to conquer. So just this once, we're going to break down the Aquaman trilogy that could have been, and why I'm not confident the storylines left unresolved here can adequately sustain sequels. When Aquaman challenges his brother Orm for the throne of Atlantis in the Ring of Fire, which is a pretty dorky sentence I gotta say,
I will never be hip.
he loses and, by all rights, would have perished if not for Mera's intervention on his behalf. The battle is pretty cool as all of the action sequences in this have been thus far. Outside of that one scene from Top Secret, underwater combat is something you don't often get to see, and Wan and company seem to have no trouble figuring out how to not only make it work, but make it genuinely thrilling. If there's anything he excels at here, it's capturing bodies in motion. Now on the run from Orm, Arthur and Mera begin a series of Indiana Jones-styled archaeological side quests through the ruins of the Deserter Kingdom in the middle of the Sahara, and later into Sicily to find clues to the location of Atlan's trident. Unbeknownst, which is a word I don't get to use nearly enough to them, Orm has contracted Black Manta to track down the fugitives and put them out of his misery, arming him with bleeding-edge Atlantean weapons technology that he immediately tears apart, refitting it into the well-known jet-black laser-eyed diving suit that has been a staple in the comics since his first appearance back in 1967.
Really? Well, it's about time.
To be honest, I cannot overstate how much I wish Black Manta wasn't in this. And it's not because I don't think he's awesome, I do and I always have. My problem is that Black Manta deserves his own movie, one where he is the primary antagonist, not an errand boy for someone else. When he attacks Arthur and Mera in Italy, it sets off one of the most exciting action sequences in the entire film. Part fistfight, part foot chase, with its focus switching seamlessly back and forth from Arthur's long-awaited rematch with Manta to Mera's rooftop set pursuit by Atlantean guards. It's great fun, something I'll applaud the film for being able to achieve effortlessly and at every turn, but it ends with a defeat for Black Manta that is so vicious it could have easily been his death scene. Earlier, I spoke of a missed opportunity where Arthur and Black Manta are concerned. Personally, I believe the two characters have more in common than either of them realize, and if Black Manta had been given his own film, it's an aspect of their relationship I would have enjoyed seeing explored. That being how they are both put under extreme pressure by their parents to take on lives they may not have chosen for themselves. Atlanta believes her son will unite the ocean and surface world, and everyone in his life presses Arthur to take the throne despite being woefully unfit to sit upon it, and preside over an entire nation with no regard for what he wants. On the opposite hand, with his dying words, Black Manta's father Cain burdens his son with a lifelong mission to avenge his death by slaying Aquaman, again with no consideration for whatever life he would have wanted for himself. Now don't get me wrong, Black Manta makes for a great villain, but if Cain had filled his role in this film, serving as a henchman to Orm instead, we could have further built up Black Manta's relationship with him. What kind of father demands their child live solely for revenge? What was it like growing up with someone like that? Where is his mother? Is she dead, lost as collateral damage for Cain's life choices? Did she abandon her son like Atlanta? And if so, does Black Manta blame himself for that? Does Cain? With Cain serving as the first Black Manta, he would have been the one to die in Sicily, and his son could have donned his father's armor, adding the red-eyed helm as a final visual touch to complete the transformation, where he would then be poised for a return as the main villain in Aquaman 2, The Wrath of Black Manta, with more of an emotional stake in everything that happened in this film. And that could have been a straightforward revenge thriller, with Black Manta killing and maiming his way through everyone Aquaman loved just to force a rematch with him. I also think through their encounters in the second film, Aquaman and Black Manta, with this new shared onus of towering burdens placed upon them both by their parents, might have even come to understand one another, maybe even reconcile their differences. This idea isn't even beyond the realm of possibility. Arthur voices his regret for not saving Cain when he had the chance, and how that has now come back to not only haunt him, but threaten those he's come to care for. So I don't believe the two of them couldn't potentially learn to forgive one another. Revenge is a great motivator, but it's also poison, and threatens to destroy all who seek it. It would have been something to see Black Manta chase that vengeance until it nearly ended him, and then find redemption by finally putting his father's ghost to rest.
Piss off, ghost!
To come out the other side a better man. Or, if you're not into that, you could just...
let them fight.
I mean, whatever. Do what you want. I don't care. Now, no one's to say this couldn't all still happen, but I'm not counting on it. By now, you're probably saying, you said what you do with the second Aquaman film, but not the first. What would you change in this movie? Well, I'm going to have to circle back around in order to answer that, because there's some ground we still have to cover before I can get there. At this point in the film, Aquaman and Mera have commandeered a small fishing boat and set sail for the Kingdom of the Trench to find Atlan's trident, which begins one of the movie's most memorable sequences, as well as just a chance for James Wan to shine, to live and thrive in his freakish element. In barely any time at all, they are set upon by fierce primordial sea creatures in a scene that is like something straight out of H.P. Lovecraft's nightmares. It is a tense, perilous ordeal that has the distinction of looking and feeling like no other part of the movie, and it is pretty enthralling. It also shouldn't be in this movie. In fact, everything that happens after the battle with Black Manta in Sicily shouldn't be in this movie. I'm just gonna blow through these, so...
hold on to something tight!
After fighting their way through an all-out assault on their stolen boat and barely outswimming a swarm of rabid piranha people, Aquaman and Mera face an interdimensional underwater vortex or something that spits them out in a kind of oasis where they are reunited with his mother Atlanta, whom, as it turns out, didn't die all those years ago and has instead been pulling a Hiccup's mom this whole time. Which leads to Arthur venturing into the trench proper, where he discovers not only Atlan's trident, but the Sea King's righteous 80s death metal album cover looking remains as well. But before he can level up, he must first do battle with a smarmy, city-sized Cthulhu-esque Leviathan voiced by Julie Andrews, yes, that Julie Andrews, called the Karathan, who finds him worthy, proclaiming him the one true king only after devoting several seconds to smacking him around and calling him names.
Just as I thought. Extremely stubborn and suspicious.
Yeah, good times. So Arthur passes the test, pulls Excalibur from the stone because this movie's been a lot of things so far, but subtle isn't one of them, receives the quickening, which instantly gives him the power to see and hear and feel every living thing in the entire ocean. And when he comes back, he's wearing the actual honest-to-God costume from the comics, which shouldn't look incredible at all, but does, and we fast forward to where Orm, also finally rocking the preposterous but still somehow kind of awesome costume of his comic book counterpart, is having a straight-up no-shit Battle of the Five Armies moment that goes on just long enough for us to start thinking maybe we shouldn't be doing this just yet, but too late, because here comes Aquaman riding the Karathan now, because it's time for a showdown with the Ocean Master over who's going to be King of Atlantis, ruler of the sea, and oh my god, stop. No, just no. This is too much. I said I would circle back around to how I'd handle the first film, and I will, but what you're looking at right now, as has been proven time and time and time again by the likes of Captain America Civil War, Army of Darkness, Toy Story 3, Return of the Jedi, Return of the King, The Dark Knight Rises, Matrix Revolutions, which is admittedly a poor example, and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, is classic Part 3 final chapter content. You cannot, or at the very least probably should not, end the first installment of your trilogy with an action sequence of this size. You know what you get when you do that? You get this. No, you have to earn this, Private Ryan. Earn it. This is your third movie. Everything from the Trench and the Trident to the War of the 4 or 5, who knows, I can't keep counting anymore, kingdoms, and the contest between Aquaman and Ocean Master for the throne of Atlantis, because, that's right, I wouldn't end the first Aquaman movie with Arthur defeating Orm and becoming king. Again, you have to earn that.
You're goddamn right.
Keep everything in this movie up until the Trench. Give me more scenes set in Atlantis. Build upon Mera's character, on her motivation and relationships with Orm and her father. Give King Riku and his daughter, who will herself be a queen soon, something to do other than float around and get stabbed to death. Use flashbacks to show more of Arthur's training under Vulko alongside scenes of a young Orm growing to loathe his mother for the birth of his half-brother, for not being her first choice, for robbing him of the throne. Make the Ring of Fire the climactic scene, the final confrontation between Arthur and Orm. Hell, make it a tournament where all of the major characters we've been introduced to get to vie for the throne, and have it play out like Rocky, with Arthur losing the fight and the crown, but gaining the respect of the Atlanteans even in defeat. Ooh, spoilers for Rocky, I guess. It's no more preposterous than letting a magic pitchfork determine who gets to rule the ocean. Let Orm lead Atlantis over the course of the next 2 films and show us in detail how unsuited he is for the task. Show us the damage his reign has caused, so when Arthur finally returns, stronger, wiser, and experienced enough to confront him, there's actually something at stake beyond a bunch of nameless CGI creatures firing lasers at one another. The Battle of Undersea Armies is spectacular, but that's all it is. It's spectacle. It's sweeping and ambitious, but it's not but sound and fury. Nothing in this scene matters because we don't know or care about anybody involved in it.
It doesn't matter!
And don't get me wrong, the final battle between Aquaman and Ocean Master atop the submarine is fantastic, but it's simply too soon for it. What is there even left to do after this fight? What is there left to do with this franchise? Really, I mean it. What's the plan now? What could possibly be next? Where do you even go from here? Space? Oceans in space? Space oceans? Is that even a thing?
You're gonna have a stroke, little buddy.
Now that he's been crowned, it's not impossible Aquaman 2 could focus on the challenges that come from being a king, from Arthur attempting to govern a people he barely knows, struggling to mediate peace between multiple kingdoms, each more alien to him than the one before, but I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't count on a movie like this following up its massive third-act CGI 4-army-strong battle royale and manly death duel to see which of the two least qualified characters in the film gets to lead a nation, by giving us a 2-hour-plus sequel about the subtle and intricate political complexities of running a country and the day-to-day minutia that comes part and parcel with being a head of state. Somehow I just don't see it. In all fairness, and there's no shame in admitting this, but maybe Aquaman just isn't that kind of movie. I'm willing to accept that the big, dumb, somewhat mindless fun, the campy dialogue, the lack of three-dimensional characters and sensible motivations, and the throw a lot of stuff at the wall to see what sticks mentality really is the vision of the filmmakers. Maybe it is what they were going for, and if that be the case, I guess there's really nothing here to complain about. Besides, we've already kind of seen what taking this stuff too seriously gets us, so it probably is best we leave that approach behind. That's right, buddy, just let it out. Oh, and just so you don't think I left before the credits rolled, or I somehow wasn't paying attention, yeah, I know there's a scene at the end of this that teases Black Manta's return, but let me tell you why that not only doesn't work, but gives me no confidence going forward. Now, in order to put this in terms that will make sense, I have to draw a parallel to the Fatal Fury series based on the old SNK Neo Geo video games from the early 90s. So if there are any old school fighting game and or anime fans watching, this is for you. So in Fatal Fury, franchise bad guy Geese Howard murders series protagonist Terry Bogart's father when he was just a boy, so he vows to avenge him and begins to train in the martial arts until he's old enough to challenge Geese in combat. He does, and he wins, and then a year later we learn Geese has a brother named Krauser who is more powerful than Geese ever was. Krauser challenges Terry Bogard, who ultimately defeats him, all while Geese has been living in a cave feeling sorry for himself. But when Geese learns his brother's been beaten, he starts training for a rematch with Terry, which is all fine and good, whatever. The problem is, while Geese Howard is busy learning how to knock down trees by screaming at them, Terry Bogard goes off to Turkey or some damn place and defeats, no joke, Mars, the god of war. Yeah, take a moment to let that sink in. Needless to say, Geese Howard and Terry Bogard never got a rematch.
Where are you going with this?
My point is, Black Manta fights Aquaman twice in this movie and loses to him both times. Even armed with state-of-the-art Atlantean weaponry and an actual motivation, he loses, and so badly, in fact, the second time, that I thought he died. Then he conveniently turns up in this ridiculous post-credit scene after having been found adrift at sea. He is taken to a shed or something belonging to a scientist of sorts we've only seen once before in a 10-second news clip where he has the audacity to say,
"But first, you gotta tell me how to find him."
And then he throws his father's knife into a newspaper clipping, which I imagine is meant to imply that there is some sort of reckoning coming. And maybe that would have been possible a week ago, but bruh, Arthur is now king of Atlantis. He leads a massive army. He's now protected by Vulco, Nereus, Mera, and Atlanta. He lives in an impregnable underwater city. He wields a trident that lets him control everything in the entire ocean, and he commands the Karathan. And you think you're going to fight him?
Good luck.
It doesn't matter how angry with Aquaman you are, my dude, or how owed you might feel. You couldn't beat him before he had any of these things going for him. What exactly is it you think you're going to do when you face him next time other than get blown to smithereens and chucked off a cliff into the sea again? So no, I don't have a whole lot of faith in Black Manta's return for the Aquaman sequel. Maybe if they'd abandoned that whole only the one true king may wield Atlan's trident thing and set it up so Black Manta found it first, giving him power over the Trent and the Karathan, then maybe we'd have an actual fight going into the next film. But as of right now, I'm sorry to say, this guy doesn't stand an Alaskan snow crab's chance at a Red Lobster buffet of winning against Aquaman now. Escalation can be a killer, but audiences demand that sequels escalate. You simply do not have the luxury of being able to go backwards. Aquaman is a mostly diverting and fun-filled jaunt of a movie. It looks and sounds amazing. I genuinely applaud it for its refusal to run away from the loonier elements that are all but baked into the character and his world, and it certainly doesn't lack for ambition, which all involved may soon find to have been too much of a good thing because I am left wondering where you can possibly lead or take this character now when seemingly his story has already been told in its entirety. How do you up the ante going into the next chapter? As I said before, it's only fair to acknowledge that the movie I wanted out of this is just that, the movie I wanted. Not necessarily the movie Warner Brothers and DC set out to make, and I can absolutely appreciate that. Aquaman moves away from the severe suspect model employed by its predecessors to its benefit, and my hope is the franchise will continue to do so. Orm is still alive, albeit imprisoned. The fishermen have a new queen in Princess What's-Her-Name, and Arthur doesn't have the first damn clue what he's doing, so there's that, I suppose. None of that really screams sequel to me, but I'm not looking for it to fail. I sincerely hope this franchise can sustain itself. I hope it can not only survive, but thrive. But mostly, I hope I'm wrong about there being no paths left to take and no roads left to travel, all on account of the powers that be wanting to have their fish cake and eat it too. Because to have come out of the gate so boldly only to now find itself lost at sea would be the greatest disappointment of all. I'm giving Aquaman 3.25 stars. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow Tangent 1985 wherever you can for more updates. As always, I'm M. Glenn Gore, and I'll see you next time.